Travel and Things in association with Sun Destinations, iconic destinations with amazing experiences, present In Conversation With. I am your host, David Batsoffen, and I'm joined by the author of Newman's Birds by Color. That's Nick Newman. Nick, good day. Welcome to you.
Hi, David. Thanks very much for having me.
It's only a pleasure. I was saying just recently to somebody, what is it about birders that they continuously want new books? You know, mammals, for those of us who are maybe wildlife photographers, you've got one or two mammal books, but we've all got at least 6 bird books on our shelves. Whether or not we use them is another story altogether.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the correct answer is to that. I know many people say that authors only put out, change the names of birds just so they can put out a new book. That's not entirely true, but you know, it is one of the reasons why things need to be updated.
Right.
But with you, I have a problem with books myself. If you have a look
I can
there.
see. Mine are to the side. They're
Yeah.
out of scope.
And then there are ones that don't fit in that bookshelf. So yeah,
Yeah, this is the problem, you know. What do you do with those?
I think we want to just know more.
Yeah, I see on the cover you've got the crimson-breasted shrike. Does the yellow morph actually exist, or is that just a digitally altered crimson-breasted bird?
No, it does exist. I think I've yet to see it, but I've seen photos of it, so I know that
Yeah,
it
but
does exist.
you see, this is why I'm asking the question, because I too have seen photographs. That particular shrike, I call it the ADHD bird, because they're
Okay.
almost impossible to photograph. They never sit still.
Yeah, tricky ones.
Indeed. Now, people may know the name Newman in birding circles, and of course, there's this one, which was the original. So, is it? Are you, as his son, as Kenneth's son, hardwired to be a birder, or could you have gone on, I don't know, to be a rocket scientist if you really wanted to?
Well, I think when I started off birding, well, I started off my life of natural history. I didn't particularly like birds. They're always a little bit small, at a distance, and flew off behind a branch or a bush before I could actually get my eyes onto them. And I was actually more drawn to butterflies to start off with. You
Okay.
know, more colorful colors that I could see, stay slightly more still, so I could approach them, and yeah, I kind of got onto butterflies in the beginning,
Right.
but it probably was through my indoctrination, or many a trips with my parents to a game reserve or something, that the slow and steady drip of birding came into my psyche, and whether I liked it or not, I now knew what a bird was versus another bird. So
So
yeah,
from what I'm hearing is you had no choice in this. What
yeah,
about
I had no choice.
what about your siblings?
Well, unfortunately, they seem to have had no choice either. Whether or not they like it, they seem to know the difference between an eagle and a dove. So yeah, it's rubbed off.
So take me through this particular book, and it's the journey from here to here.
Well, David, yeah, I mean, Newman's has been around. My father put out the first identification bird in 1967, after realizing that there was a need for easy identification uh, books and field guides to the region. There was always larger books, and Roberts was, you know, the encyclopedia and still is,
Yeah.
and needed something a little bit more easy to reference and find and identify birds. So it's been a natural kind of growth from the very first book, which was Garden Birds of Southern Africa, was his very
Mhm.
first, which started off saying, how do we start off educating people to what common birds were in their garden they could find, and foster the love of birding at a very kind of simple and easy, accessible level.
Right.
Dad then he's put out like 23 different titles. And in 1963, that yellow book was the first comprehensive field guide of all the species within the Southern African region.
Right.
And that was, again, the principle of that was a field guide, something that you could take into the field, have clear identification illustrations of what you could see. And the text was specific to helping birders identify what they were seeing. If you wanted more, it was always, they had a reference to a page number of the Roberts that you could then go and read up more about the bird, whether a distribution or color morphs or nesting behavior, or, but if you wanted to understand what you've just seen and have some real kind of concise information around how to identify birds, this was the book. And, as I said, kind of that recipe of helping birders understand what the keys to identification are,
Right.
and how to zone in on a species and make that successful identification was a proven success record. And yeah, as I said, put out several editions over the years, and that's been a great leveler. And then, kind of coming to where we are now, I kind of took over the Newman's management from my sister, who'd put out the last update of the field guide, and took over from the running of the business probably in kind of 2019, and
Right.
was looking at repositioning and doing a lot of works and updates. Distribution maps are really interesting at the moment, what with climate change and how things are moving, and bird names and new bird names, and whether new species as well. Rarities are always popping up in the region.
Yeah, just
So I
when
was
we think
working
we've
on
got it down, us non-birders, just when we think we've got it down, they sneak in a new. But
exactly.
Nick, why? Help me on this one. Because I always feel so sad for a bird when it's called a common something, like a common minor. They don't call us common human beings, and we are. Whereas there are billions of us. We're as numerous as there are red-billed quelea, for instance.
Yeah.
But we don't
Look,
we don't call ourselves common. Yet
yeah, I agree
birds,
with
it's
you.
not
I
fair.
mean, I might be pretty common, a common ginger, but we'll carry on.
But gingers are unique. Come on, you're not common.
Yeah, look, it really is just aligning to the taxonomical kind of nomenclature
Right.
that we need to kind of put together. So yeah, I'd love to have a lot of the names that I grew up with to have remained, because they were quite descriptive
Yeah.
a lot of the time, and that made it easier to remember as a new birder. There's we underestimate the reward of, first of all, identifying a species by yourself, and then remembering the name of it when you come up again. You're like, oh, I remember what that is, and you're like, oh, and when you're younger, or if you sit, not just younger, but you're starting off, if you remember the image of something is far more rememberable, and therefore, if the color is associated to that, you're like, yellow weaver, I got that, but those means that you kind of feel that you've actually kind of leveled up from just basic to something of knowing something. So yeah.
So how did you choose the order in which the colors would be represented in your book?
Well, it's kind of going black and white, and so starting off with this book is really about first impression of color.
Right.
And when you're in the bush or anywhere and you see a bird, that first impression is what is the lasting kind of memory of what you saw, an identification marker. So I think a lot of people could say either birds are just brown, or various versions of brown, or
that's why they're
black.
called LBJs.
Exactly. So yeah, kind of just starting off with some of those bolder first impression colors, and black is a very bold and distinguishable color. And then the black and white and is that contrast, you know.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of aligning along there, and then the colors of the rainbow help. And then it ends off with speckled and collars, and it's really, again, those are about distinguishing markers that leave a memorable image that you recall in your head when the bird naturally flies away behind a bush or ducks down. You're like, oh, it was kind of speckly, or it had a really broad band or collar. That's what I can remember.
Yeah.
The shape of the eyes may be a bit blurry. And that's essentially how starts off. First impression.
The first time I saw, is it a red-collared barbet? I thought
Black collared.
is it black-collared?
Black collared barbet, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was some I don't know, Frankenstein type of bird that had been stuck together or had been damaged by a car or something.
No
Because I'd
shame.
never seen it before, and it arrived in my garden one day.
Yeah.
And then you go to the bookshelves and you pull out the books and go, what is this? Or you phone the birder that you have on speed dial going, this is the picture.
Yes.
What the heck have I just seen?
Yeah. Well, that's it. And that's the beauty of this Birds by Color title. It's got 640 commonly and not so common species within the
Right.
greater region, Southern African region. And it's about, you've just seen something, and how do you, as a beginner birder and a new birder, or just somebody who's, enjoys birds and been birding for a while, but just wants a quick and easier way of identifying a species that you've just seen. A lot of us, we might only go to the bush once a year on our kind of big holiday, and we forget a lot of the names, or like, what is that again? I can't remember. And it's about this ease of identification. And the principles of identification that this book really, really hones on and focuses on. And the principle is really about trying to make birding as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Our mission is to get as many people birding as possible in this country.
The problem with birders, Nick, is they stop. And then, you're driving through a reserve and there's a vehicle and you don't know what they're looking at. There's nothing on the ground.
Yeah.
Stop to ask these people, what are you looking at? Oh, there's a nest. What? But they're very not pedantic's the wrong word, but they're overly keen. They will stop on a dime because something's past them. But I am in awe of birders for two reasons. One, they have inordinate patience. They will sit in a hide for hours and hours and hours to wait for a dab chick to scuttle by. And secondly, when I've done bushwalks with people like Bruce Lawson, who can tell you birds just from their call, he doesn't stop talking because he knows every single call. Those are that's special time in the bush.
I think time in the bush is invaluable, but we don't all have that.
Yeah.
But it does become enriching when you can start spending some time observing behavior of a species, because then birding shouldn't just be a tick box exercise. We shouldn't just be rushing to our life list and when a new rarity comes in, we're rushing off, and that's all very well and good, and that's a great part of birding, but it shouldn't be going out there just to see how many we see. It should be about, as well as enriching your experience around what's happening with the birds at this time of the year. Are they breeding, non-breeding? What are their behaviors? And that means it doesn't just become a tick box exercise. It means that you're actually experiencing the birds in a greater kind of enriching scenario. Bird calls are a great kind of addition. They're tricky and it does take practice. And I can get out of practice between one season and the other. Like a southern boo-boo is one of the most cryptically, has all kinds of different calls, and regionally they kind of tweet and twaddle differently as well, and they keep you on your toes. They keep you on your toes. So it's an interesting one.
So is there a bird on your list, Nick, that You know, there was that bird that popped up in Hoedspruit. Was it a couple of years ago? That wasn't meant to be in Hoedspruit. I think it missed the migration or something. And people rocketed through from Joburg. They drove 5 hours just to see if they could spot it, and then 5 hours back. But that tells, you know, goes to what you were just saying about now you can just tick it off. Or did you go because you really, really, really wanted to see it?
Look, as I said, we've got some rarities in the moment that are coming on through, and they're exciting. And it's certainly as I said, a way of adding interest and you know, seeing something for the first time in any version, you know, in any kind of sport is exciting. Firsts are always exciting, but getting to know them further, you know, I've done a kind of competitive birding, and I also quite enjoy atlasing, which is sitting in a pentad, which is kind of roughly 3 by 3 Ks or so, and seeing as many species within that kind of radius as you possibly can. That means you spend more time actually observing nature. And to be honest, if we think about why we like birds, is that we have a connection with nature as a whole. And you then start appreciating just the beauty of your surroundings, understanding a little bit more around, and it's, you know, you kind of go, have I seen just one sparrow, or am I seeing 51 sparrows, and why? What's going on here? You know, and when you often, and this is kind of reversed back into, you know, birders, when you're in the Kruger stopping at a nest or something, when you're stopping for the smaller things, it gives time for the larger things to come out. Many a time I stopped, and, you know, with my parents, and we've been examining, I don't know, probably another dove's foot, and next thing there's a leopard up a tree or across a river, or, you know, and you're seeing the dung beetles and mongoose and, you know, stuff that you might be traveling through looking for larger items. It really makes the bush enriching.
Not so much stop and smell the roses, but stop and watch the birds. But now I want to go back to something you sort of brushed past: competitive birding. I mean, is this now an Olympic sport?
Well, the sport of birding is a great sport, and you can have different levels of that. But yeah, you know, we do birding big day, for instance, a 24-hour challenge, a radius that you know, whether it's 50 or 10-kilometer radius, is a competitive birding to see as many species in a 24-hour period. And it's not, what I like about that is it's not just for your own kind of checklist and ego to see how many you have seen and can see, but it also goes towards atlasing and distribution data. It's invaluable around the concentration that then goes, and BirdLife and other conservation organizations utilize that data because it's so focused and quite saturated in terms of birds that are seen, rather than you passing through areas that you may not necessarily always venture to. So yeah, you know, I like the dovetail between competitiveness and the trickle down to environmental kind of concerns and support.
And what sort of numbers are seen on a day like that?
So the winners are in, I think, 340 plus minus in 24 hours. That's the top teams. And yeah, so it's quite intense. I think the top 10 teams are spaced between probably 40 species. So, you know, what's that? 270, 280 is probably the top 10, and then the first place is 340. I think it might be just 336 at the moment, but yeah, every year there seems to be one extra species that people are finding and then getting the title, which is great. Yeah, 24 hours is long to be looking through stuff and keeping your eyes open. So yeah.
Because I saw on Facebook this morning, and I suppose that's not well, in this case, it is research. Some lady who's just reached 843 species on her life list. I mean, is there a record in South Africa or a world record for sort of what numbers are we looking at?
Well, I think world's records are anywhere over 10,000. You're doing pretty well.
Wow.
somebody recently reached that, I think, beginning of this year, late last year, recently reached that target. So that's pretty special. You got to have some reserves to get out and find all these things.
I should imagine so. And how can we believe are birders then innately honest that they what they say they've seen? Because there's no real, I mean, if you hear a bird, does that count, or do you have to see it and photograph it so that you've got evidence?
So hearing it does count if you're on some of these birding big day challenges.
Okay.
That's also part of not disturbing birds, just to make sure you've seen it, if you can identify that bird call. And you also need, in your team, somebody needs to validate that. You can't just go, I think I heard that. You have to be like, hold on, we have validated that. But yes, I think when you're getting up to those larger numbers and those rarities, you can't just call a rarity these days. And be believed. There is a requirement to have a photo just to substantiate the fact that identification isn't just you wanting to one-up your friend on the number base. So yeah, and yeah, I think photographs are definitely part and parcel of that.
Now, you mentioned calls. Now, I know there was a bird book brought out some years ago that had a little wand with it, and if you waved your wand over the book, there'd be a call. There are bird apps that give you calls. Might this be the next Newman's birds by call, perhaps? Or is that difficult to put into a textbook rather than an app?
No, I don't think it's difficult to put into a textbook, and I think there have been some books that have aligned that in for users to easily kind of sink into. Yeah, it's certainly adds to the interest and I think enriching. There's some iconic calls of the wild, and if you're trying to get people interested in birds, calls are definitely part of that. We have an app that plays to that field of enriching that, and yeah, a lot of people, it's an integral part of identifying and being familiar with birds.
Often authors, I'll chat to them about their book and I'll ask them if there have been any mistakes in the book, grammatical errors or spelling errors, and invariably somebody has spotted one or two, perhaps.
Yeah.
Once your book was out, did you go, oh, heck, I left out the common mossy? How could I have forgotten that?
I don't think so on this one. It's early days still. It's been out to the public, I think, for probably since the beginning of June. And yeah, so maybe somebody's going to find something that I didn't do. Putting it together, there's a lot of revisions, and you're going over the templates before. And at the time, I realized I hadn't put woodpeckers. There was one, I think it was an olive woodpecker, which is predominantly green, and I hadn't put it in the green section. And I did put I went, oh, how did I miss that?
In the brown section.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the joys of having quality editors and working on drafts and looking at them again. Your eyes do get accustomed to layouts and stuff like that, but it's important to kind of look over them and go away, start and come back. Yeah.
Second exactly. Or even third pair of eyes. Perhaps more academic than you, just to go over and make sure. But then by the same token, do you get to a point where you know that what draft X is going to be the final, and you can send it off to the publishers, in this case it's Strake, and you can say to them, done, dusted, send it to print?
I think I speak on behalf of a lot of authors. You're never done. You always want more, but you have to cut off.
You have a deadline, Nick.
Well, deadlines are there to be broken, but yes.
Yeah, your publishers must love you.
There is a time where you're going to have to say, okay, hold on, this needs to happen. The amount of LBJs to put into a book like this is not Birds for Dummies. This is not aimed at that. It's aimed at getting people being able to comfortably identify some of the more common seen species. And what might be common to in the Kruger Park in a kind of a rich area is not common when you're going to the Karoo.
Yeah.
And for this book needs to allow you to pass through the Karoo. We have beautiful parks and areas in there and visit them and still be able to use it for some of those more cryptic LBJs. But we're not wanting us into huge detail around this. So there's some of the fundamentals of those seen more browny gray, light gray, brown, gray, brown. Small birds.
Lots of pipits are the ones that get me.
Yeah, pipits, larks, but also a lot of the Korans and bustards and most of those birds on there are of that kind of cryptic brown wash.
Right.
And yeah, it's important to be able to say that this book is useful in all kinds of areas. Bringing those kind of areas into focus is where I added habitat icons into every species. So that it's really important to habitat is such a crucial part of identifying birds, and also not just identifying, but eliminating other species. If you know that a bird is not found in the region, you eliminate it out of your question of, is this that bird? And it helps you just kind of focus to what you should be looking at or looking for.
You spoke earlier, sorry, Nick, you spoke earlier of climate change. If this is starting to affect the habitats, do we, or are you not finding birds that shouldn't be in a specific area now in that area because of a change in vegetation?
So I think vegetation is a tricky one, because you either got de-vegetation or forestation, if that's a little bit more broader term, where there's an absence of their natural habitat, and then you get, I'm in Johannesburg, and I think we know that this is kind of one of the biggest, this used to be a high fell grassland, and we've planted it up in suburbia, and there's now essentially woodland, and mixed woodland. So we've artificially spread, kind of brought in species here, and that's maybe not a bad thing, because we've allowed for what some deforestation out in some of the rural areas may have got. Then there's more, an interesting one is around like the African palm swift and their population extent, the distribution extent that they are doing. They only nest in palm trees, and they need palm trees, essentially. Now, traditionally, there were no palm trees. That's a tropical plant, and as man made structures, it's a pretty plant for us to plant up all over the place in the shopping center and our complexes and stuff like that.
And with cell phone towers with plastic ones.
Yeah, no, they're specific to palm trees. And so this kind of planting up has meant that African palm swifts who were never in the Cape area have now, their distribution has increased almost to Cape Town. And that's in part and parcel of an increase of the actual habitat. They required nesting habitat of a palm tree, but also possibly the warming kind of climate change, allowing them to stay in that area throughout the year, because it's a slightly more temperate than what it would have been 50 years ago. It was rather too cold and wet for them, and they would have moved out. They may have come in but moved out, but now it's maybe possibly a little bit more temperate. That's still needing to be well studied to cement as fact, but they're in the region in smaller numbers, and only because they've got nesting sites which have been artificially planted.
Nick, as we come up to the end of the interview, these sort of things just zip by because you've got a great source of knowledge. You really have, and it's of interest, I think, to my viewers. Where is the book available? It's published by Strake. Does that mean that it's available in bookstores? Can you get it online?
Yeah, it's in, I think, online, all good bookstores.
Even bad bookstores, perhaps?
Even bad bookstores. I'm pretty sure I have this because it's a good book. But
always like that expression, available in all good bookstores. Bad bookstores, they've got other stuff.
So it's available pretty much everywhere, I would say. And if you can't get it, go online, search for it, and you definitely will get it.
Great stuff. Now, final question. I know authors who have pictures on the back of their book, and I don't know if I can, the blur, unfortunately, on this one shows that there isn't your photograph on the back of the book.
Yeah.
But would you walk into a good bookshop and go, oh, look, there's a new Newman's bird book out. Perhaps I should add this to my collection. Looking around you, hoping that somebody else sees you and buys a copy as well.
Well, look, I don't know. Marketing is marketing, I suppose, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm as overt as that.
It's no such thing as bad publicity, Nick.
True story.
My guest today on In Conversation with has been Nick Newman. The book is called Newman's Birds by Color. This is the update of Kenneth Newman's book. Nick, thank you so very much for joining me. I wish you all the best with this one. And just before I say goodbye, is there already another one in the works, or is this it for the moment?
Yeah, I just need to catch my breath after this one, for a few minutes.
Fair enough. Nick, thanks once again for joining me on In Conversation.
Thank you so much, David. Pleasure. Thank you.